Hello dear students, welcome to this lecture on critical evaluation of Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau. The primary objective of today's lecture is to have a critical evaluation of the social contract traditions as represented by renowned political philosophers Thomas Hobbes, John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. This analysis aims to provide a comprehensive understanding of the theoretical framework and its practical implications. Now let me give you an introduction about the topic. The most significant political thinkers in Western history are Thomas Hobbes, John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Their perspectives on the structure of government and the connection between the individual and the state have had a significant influence on the growth of contemporary political thinking. The social contract was a theory that Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau all addressed in their writings. The social contract is a hypothetical pact that individuals make among themselves to establish a government. Several philosophers and critics have raised some challenges against Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau's viewpoints. Since such theories presuppose that humans are either naturally greedy or naturally decent, some critics claim that they are implausible. Others contend that these beliefs are overly idealistic since they constantly presume that the government would act in the citizens' best interests. A common thread all three of them have shared is the social contract theory. A major critique is that it is unreasonable to ask individuals to give up their basic rights in exchange for a government's protection. Another critique of the social contract theory is that it does not clearly define the general will, making it impossible to determine how it should be carried out. Let's deal with each thinker and critical evaluation in more detail now. Let me begin by Thomas Hobbes. In 1588, Thomas Hobbes was born in England. He experienced a period of intense political and theological upheaval, and this had a significant influence on his ideas. Hobbes claimed that humanity lived in a state of war before the establishment of government in his most well-known work, Leviathan, published in 1651. People, according to Hobbes, in this state of nature are constantly in danger of getting killed or injured since there is neither law nor order. Hence, in the state of nature, Hobbes argues life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. He describes the state of nature as a war of all against all. People enter into a social contract to break free from this state of nature, agreeing to give up part of their inherent rights in return for the protection of a sovereign power. The sovereign power is ultimate authority in the state, and it has the right to make laws and enforce order. Hobbes emphasizes the need for a strong central authority, prioritizing stability over individual liberties. One can argue that Hobbes' view of an authoritarian state and the surrender of individual rights in exchange for security is problematic. It raises questions about the potential abuse of power by the government and the potential suppression of individual freedoms. It's important to understand that the Hobbes' work is vital because it provides a realistic view of human nature. Hobbes recognizes that human beings are capable of great good, but he also recognizes that they are capable of great evil. He argues that the only way to prevent people from harming each other is to create a strong government. One of the most common criticisms of Hobbes' theory is that it is too pessimistic about human nature. Hobbes argues that humans are naturally selfish and aggressive, and that they will only cooperate if they are forced to do so. However, many critics argue that this is an unrealistic view of human nature. They point out that humans are also capable of cooperation, altruism, and compassion. Another key criticism of Hobbes' political philosophy is that it places too much emphasis on the role of the state and not enough emphasis on the role of individual freedom and autonomy. Critics argue that Hobbes' theory fails to account for the importance of individual rights and freedoms, and that it places too much trust in the ability of state to protect its citizens. Hobbes' theory, as critics argue, is too authoritarian. Hobbes argues that the sovereign or ruler must have absolute power to maintain order. However, many critics argue that this is a dangerous idea. They point out that the absolute power can easily be abused and that it is important to have checks and balances on the power of the state. Hobbes' justification for absolute sovereignty has also been controversial. Some critics argue that it is too extreme and that it gives the sovereign power too much power. They argue that the sovereign power could use its power to oppress its subjects and that there should be some limits on the sovereign power's authority. Others have defended Hobbes, arguing that his justification for absolute sovereignty is necessary to prevent the state of nature. They argue that the sovereign power must be able to make laws, enforce those laws, and punish those who break them. They also argue that the sovereign power must be able to raise an army to defend state from its enemies. Another important criticism of Hobbes' social theory is that it fails to account for the importance of social diversity and individual differences. Critics argue that by emphasizing the need for a strict social hierarchy, Hobbes' theory fails to recognize the importance of individual freedom and autonomy. To make it more clear from critical perspective, some more questions need to be asked to consider when evaluating Hobbes' work. Hobbes' theory of the state is based on the idea that humans are naturally selfish and aggressive. Is this an accurate view of human nature? Hobbes argues that the sovereign or ruler must have absolute power to maintain order. Is this a necessary condition for peace and security? Hobbes' theory of state is highly authoritarian. What are the dangers of absolute power? What are the strengths and weaknesses of Hobbes' work? Over the years, Hobbes' political and social views have drawn a lot of criticism. Although Hobbes' emphasis on social stability and order has some merit, his theories are sometimes criticized for being unduly pessimistic and gloomy, and for prioritizing the role of the state over individual rights and freedoms. Now, let us come to John Locke. John Locke was born in England in 1632. He was a qualified medical doctor, philosopher, and political thinker. Due to his religious convictions and his involvement in the Glorious Revolution of 1688, Locke's opinions on the social contract were influential. Locke maintained that the natural condition was one of peace and harmony in his most important work, Two Treatises of Government, which was published in 1689, which is also his most famous work. Natural rights, including the right to life, liberty, and property, are guaranteed to everyone in this state. These rights, however, are not unalienable, and the government may impose restrictions on them to safeguard the welfare of all people. Locke also argued that the people have the right to overthrow a government that becomes tyrannical and authoritarian. Locke believed that the sovereign should only have limited powers. The sovereign should be limited by the laws of nature, which include the right to life, liberty, and property. Locke believed that the government should be limited because he believed that too much power in the hands of government could lead to tyranny. Locke places greater emphasis on individual rights and limited government, advocating for the protection of life, liberty and property. Locke's theory of natural rights and limited government, on the other hand, has been influential in the development of modern democracy. However, some critics argue that his emphasis on property rights and the accumulation of wealth may have contributed to economic inequality. Locke's work is important because it provides a more optimistic view of human nature. He believes that human beings are naturally good and that they only act badly when they are forced to do so. He argues that the government should be limited in its powers so that it cannot harm the people. In a writing titled An Essay Concerning Human Understanding, John Locke argued that the human mind is like a blank slate at the birth. We do not have any innate ideas or knowledge. Instead, all our knowledge comes from experience. John Locke divided knowledge into two categories: simple ideas and complex ideas. Simple ideas are those that are directly perceived by the senses. Complex ideas are those that are formed by combining simple ideas. His theory of knowledge has come under criticism for being overly simplistic. This empiricist view has been influential in the development of modern science. It has been criticized by other philosophers for neglecting the role of reason and innate knowledge. Locke's theory of knowledge is also subject to criticism for its limitations. For instance, it does not provide a satisfactory account of how we acquire knowledge of abstract concepts such as morality or mathematics. Additionally, it does not explain how we can know necessary truths that cannot be learned through experiences. His theory of knowledge acquisition has been criticized for failing to effectively explain how we learn abstract ideas like numbers and geometrical forms. Locke's political philosophy has also been subject to criticism for its limitations. For instance, it does not provide a clear account of relationship between individual rights and the common good. Additionally, it does not address issues of inequality and how they can be addressed within a liberal democratic framework. Locke's political perspective have also come under criticism. A society that is overly individualistic and lacking in a sense of community, according to some critics, results from Locke's emphasis on individual liberty and limited government. Locke's theory of property rights is based on the idea that individuals have a natural right to acquire and own property. He believed that property rights were essential to individual liberty and economic prosperity. While this idea has been influential in the development of modern capitalism, it has also been subject to criticism for its assumptions about the nature of property and the role of government in regulating property rights. Critics argue that the Locke's theory of property rights neglects the role of social and environmental factors in the acquisition and distribution of property. Additionally, it does not provide a clear account of how property rights can be reconciled with the common good or the needs of future generations. Some critics argue that the Locke's theory of government is based on a flawed understanding of human nature. They argue that the Locke assumes that individuals are naturally rational and that they will always act in their self-interest. This assumption, according to critics, is not supported by empirical evidence. Some scholars argue that Locke's theory of government is too individualistic and fails to take into account the role of collective action in a society. They argue that Locke's emphasis on individual rights overlooks the importance of social and political institutions in promoting the common good. Even though his ideas are based on reason and evidence rather than on faith or tradition, yet it does not adequately account for the role of emotions and passions in human life. His ideas emphasize the importance of individual liberty and the right to resist tyranny. It is optimistic about the potential of human reason and the ability of people to improve their lives. But it is too optimistic about the potential of human reason and the ability of people to improve their lives. Despite some of these flaws, Locke's philosophical perception is nevertheless widely used today. Philosophers, politicians, and educators continue to wrestle with and evaluate his view on the nature of knowledge, significance of government, and the importance of education. Coming to another important contractualist, which is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. In the year 1712, Rousseau was born in Geneva. He was also a writer, composer, and philosopher, living in a society that Rousseau perceived as a corrupt and unnatural had an impact on his ideas about the social contract. In his most important work, The Social Contract, published in 1762, Rousseau made his argument that the natural state was one of freedom and equality. He also asserted that although humans were morally upright by nature, civilization had tainted them. People enter into a social contract to escape this corruption, agreeing to give up some of their inherent freedom in return for the protection of general will. The general will is the will of people as a whole, and it is superior to the will of any individual or group. In Rousseau's romanticized view of natural world, people fundamentally are good but are tainted by social institutions. He contends that inequality and private property are the fundamental drivers of social ills that result in conflict and injustice. Rousseau believed that the best form of government is a direct democracy in which all citizens participate in the decision-making process. Rousseau believed that the direct democracy would allow people to express their will and create a more just and equitable society. Rousseau emphasizes the general will and the need for direct democracy, emphasizing social equality. Rousseau's views on the natural goodness of humans and the importance of general will have been criticized for being overly idealistic and impractical. His ideas about the preservation of individual freedom within a social contract have been influential in the development of democratic thought, but they raise questions about the potential tension between individual rights and the common good. One of Rousseau's most influential ideas is the concept of social contract. Rousseau argued that human beings are naturally free and equal, but this state of nature is characterized by conflict and instability. To escape from this state of nature, human beings enter into a social contract, which involves giving up some of their freedoms in exchange for protection and benefit provided by community or state. Yet, critics have argued that Rousseau's concept of social contract is unrealistic and idealistic. They argue that in practice, social contracts are often unjust and coercive, and that individuals do not necessarily consent them to freely. Rousseau's idea of state of nature is closely linked to his concept of social contract. He argued that in the state of nature, human beings are essentially solitary with no sense of morality or social norms. According to Rousseau, it is only through social contract that individuals can form communities and develop moral and ethical principles. But critics have argued that Rousseau's depiction of state of nature is inaccurate and based on an exaggerated view of pre-modern societies. They argue that humans have always lived in groups and have always had some form of social organization and moral principles. Rousseau was a strong advocate of education, arguing that it is essential for development of moral and ethical character. He believed that education should focus on developing the individual's natural abilities and interests rather than imposing preconceived ideas and values. However, critics have argued that Rousseau's ideas on education are impractical and fail to take into account the needs of society. They argue that the education must prepare individuals for their roles in society and that it cannot simply be a matter of self-expression and individual development. Rousseau's ideas on the role of government are closely linked to his concept of social contract. He believed that the government should be based on the general will of people rather than the will of any individual or group. He also argued that the government should be limited in its power and should only intervene in society when it is necessary to protect a common good. Nevertheless, critics have argued that Rousseau's ideas on government are vague and impractical. They argue that it is difficult to determine what the general will of the people is and that governments often need to take decisive action to address social problems. Rousseau's concept of noble savage was a radical idea in his own time. It challenged the traditional view that humans were inherently sinful and that they needed religion and government to control their behavior. Rousseau's idea that humans were naturally good had a profound impact on the French Revolution, which was based on the principle that all men are created equal. Rousseau was a deeply religious man, but he was also a critical of organized religion. He believed that religion should be based on reason and emotion rather than on dogma and tradition. He also believed that religion should be used to promote social justice and peace rather than to divide people. Rousseau's ideas about religion were controversial in his time, but they have since been adapted by many religious groups. His emphasis on the importance of reason and emotion in religion has helped to make religion more accessible to the people of all backgrounds. One of the weaknesses of Rousseau's thought is that it is often idealistic. He believed that humans are naturally good and that they can create a perfect society if they are given the chance. However, he failed to take into account the darker side of human nature such as greed, selfishness and violence. Another weakness of Rousseau's thought is that it is often impractical. His ideas about education, religion and government are all difficult to implement in the real world. For example, his idea of a direct democracy in which people are sovereign is simply not feasible in a large and complex society. Rousseau was a challenging and passionate thinker. His theories had a significant influence on the growth of contemporary democracy and education. His theories on human nature remain valid today and provide an insightful vision of a society that is more just and egalitarian. Political theory, education and literature have all been significantly influenced by his ideas. His viewpoints on the nature of government, the role of person and the benefit of education are all still relevant today. To conclude this lecture, the views of Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau have had a substantial influence on a political theory and are still explored as well as debated today. It is important to consider both the strengths and weaknesses of these views to develop a well-informed understanding of political theory. They all contribute to our understanding of origins of political authority and the relationship between the individual and the state, despite having different perspectives on the function of the state and the social compact. However, their theories also pose significant issues regarding the possibility of power abuse in the contemporary era. Dear students, with this, I conclude today's lecture. Hope to meet you again next time with a fresh topic. Goodbye.